Good evening, everybody, and it's great to see you all here, and welcome to this event in our year-long series, Humanities for Life. I'm Shruti Kapila, Director of the Humanities Center, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Farid Esack today. Professor Esack has traveled a long distance to come to Grinnell. We're very fortunate that he accepted our invitation to speak in this series. And I want to thank him, before I do a more formal introduction, for making the long trek to Grinnell from South Africa and for being with us in the day and a half that he's been here. He's generously shared his time, his stories, his experience of political activism, and his scholarship with us. So I want to thank him. I also would like to thank the board of the Humanities Center for working to make this event possible, especially Caleb Elfenbein, who connected us to Professor Esack. So a special thanks to him and to all of you for being here. Professor Farid Esack is a multi-talented scholar and activist. And as I've said, it's a special opportunity for us that he's here to speak to us about his interpretation of this very broad title that we chose, Humanities for Life. As many of the speakers said to me, kind of a little, in a little sort of acerbically, well, what else are humanities for? But, so I look forward to his talk, and here is a more formal introduction to him. Professor Farid Esack is a scholar of Islam at the University of Johannesburg. He completed the Darsi Nizami, which is the traditional Islamic studies program in madrasas in Karachi, Pakistan. He did his PhD at the University of Birmingham and his postdoctoral work on biblical hermeneutics at the Philosophische Theologische Hochschule in Frankfurt. Professor Esack has held academic appointments at the University of the Western Cape, in Amsterdam, Hamburg, Gajah Mada University, and Union Theological Seminary in New York. A former distinguished Mason Fellow at the College of William and Mary and the Bessel Professor in Ethics, Religion and Society at Xavier University in Ohio, he has also held a joint appointment for 2 years at Harvard University in the Divinity School and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences as a William Henry Bloomberg Professor. Professor Esack is the author of several publications, including Quran, Liberation and Pluralism, an Islamic Perspective of Interreligious Solidarity Against Oppression, On Being a Muslim, Finding a Religious Path in the World Today, and An Introduction to the Quran. His current major field of interest and commitment is Islam and AIDS. He is the author of a series of publications dealing with this area, including Islam, HIV and AIDS, reflections based on compassion, responsibility and justice. More recently, in 2009, he co-edited Islam and AIDS, Between Scorn, Pity and Justice. He has also published widely on Islam, gender, liberation theology, interfaith relations, religion and identity, and Quranic hermeneutics. Professor Esack has a wide experience with activism in South Africa, formerly a National Commissioner on Gender Equality appointed by President Nelson Mandela. He's also a veteran of the struggle against apartheid and an activist in the interreligious solidarity movement for justice and peace. He played a leading role in the United Democratic Front, the Call of Islam, the Organization of People Against Sexism, and the World Conference on Religion and Peace. In addition to his academic pursuits, Professor Esack continues his activism through Positive Muslims, an organization working with Muslims who are HIV positive in South Africa, and through the several development boards on which he serves in South Africa and internationally. So we are indeed privileged to have him here today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good evening, everybody. There are some more chairs here. It's a pretty universal thing, this. What I do as when I organize meetings, I put a fake row of chairs in front, very, very close, and just before the meeting starts, I remove all the empty chairs in front. Anyway, Professor Kapila, Caleb, thank you very much for inviting I was just sharing a story with Caleb about a wonderful friend that I have in Ohio City. We've been friends for about more than 10 years, an absolutely amazing human being. And he was a former student of mine. And I spent a day or two with him and his wife just after I arrived. And sometimes, well, I think often I don't know if it says more about him or more about me. He kind of wonders, you know, why there's nothing extraordinary about him. There's nothing unusual about him, he thinks. So why did I pick on him for a wonderful friendship? And I get invited to speak a lot. And I never cease to wonder, why on earth did these people invite me? But you've done that. And so I want to say thank you very much. I want to say that I'm grateful for the invitation. And I'm often grateful only after I arrive at the place. Whenever I set foot on the plane, I think, what on earth made you agree to this? Why? Why did you put yourself through this? But anyway, folks, I'm chatting to you tonight about the humanities for and beyond the human. Reflections of a progressive Islamist. I don't know, I suspect that some of you, it's probably a class requirement that you come to this lecture, okay? Most of you. Others came by choice. And you may have been intrigued by, what the hell is this progressive Islamist? On the one hand, Islamism is normally connected in people's imaginations to something that they don't like, in most people's imaginations. Something that they just don't like. But progressive is like a kind of cuddly term, you know. So yeah. Years ago, I walked away from the term progressive Islam. I walked away from it after September the 11th, when it was quite clear that many people in this country who were uncritical about this country and its policies, both economic and foreign, who had embraced the vision of this country as an example to the world, at a time when most Americans felt the need to be assured that these Muslims aren't dangerous. At such a time, this term progressive Islam became quite fashionable. It became fashionable for many, many Muslims as a way of telling these other folks in the United States, we okay, we are the good ones. I was never interested in telling Americans that I am the good one. I don't think it's my responsibility to go around allaying people's fears. When people point out how problematic Islam is in so many parts of the world, I acknowledge all of those problems. But I'm far more interested in asking another question. Why, in the face of such manifest injustice throughout the world, why in the face of occupations, invasions, the assault on the only home that we've known and that we will ever know, the earth, why in the face of the crimes against other sentient beings, why in the face of all of this, aren't you and your religious community more troublesome? Why is it that only these Muslims are the troublesome people? So that was a far more interesting question for me that I insisted on posing to other people. So tonight, I'm here for the first time since September the 11th, using this term again, progressive. And I'll say something about what I understand by it, and I'm not sure if I will use it again to describe myself. But it's part of a contestation of a refusal to let others determine the meaning of words. I'm not quite sure if I was invited because I'm an academic or because I'm really an activist masquerading as an academic. But I want to alert you to the fact that there's a good bit of sectarianism at work in my presentation tonight. Much of my presentation is that of a sectarian, a very narrow sectarian in some ways, launching an attack on another sect. And I launch this attack in the full awareness that at the end of the day, I and others in the sect that I belong to, we are probably, and in the same breath I say, God forbid, going to lose out. When I saw the title, The Humanities for Life, I thought of an organization, not a very well-known organization, but a wonderful organization that I belonged to for about 10 years and resigned last year, and I was their co-moderator. In the World Council of Churches, since the end of the Cold War, the World Council of Churches has lost much of its own prophetic edge. Its commitment to justice, its commitment to gender equality, its commitment to people in the two-third world. The World Council of Churches, partly for economic reasons and for many other reasons, has lost much of that edge. And there was a whole crowd in the World Council of Churches that wanted to retain what we call the prophetic ethos in their own work. And while they remained in the World Council of Churches, they formed another organization, primarily based in the South, more specifically Korea and the Philippines and India. And this organization was named Peace for Life. I, for about 6 years, was one of its two international co-moderators. I could never get myself to put this on my CV. I couldn't come to terms with this name, Peace for Life. It sounded kind of wacky, new agey, hug a tree. I never got to terms with it. I could never get myself to utter the name of this organization. I waged many, many battles when we got together every 2 years, to try to change the name of the organization. The Koreans tried to explain to me what it meant in Korean and how this was the best reflection. Basically, it amounted to this: that for many, many societies and for many, many governments, the peace work is the flip side of their wars. You have an economy that is strengthened by an arms industry, not too far from here. By an arms industry, you have an economy. And so economies strengthened or based on or dependent on arms industries have to wage war. It's inevitable. It's jobs. You have to wage war. You have to test out your new weapons and so on. And so we invade countries and we invest in invading countries. We invest in war. And those same governments invest in peace. But peace after they have subdued their enemies. If, for example, I studied in a madrasa in Pakistan for 8 years. And I was part of, in this, like the Hasidic Jews, for example, very, very orthodox. I'm not sure if you can speak about Orthodox Judaism as fundamentalism in the way in which the term fundamentalism is applied to Muslims today. And so in this madrasa, we lived as if we were living in the 18th century. We had chapters on jihad in our textbooks. But we never imagined translating any of that stuff into contemporary terms. We just wanted to be left alone in the 18th century. We had no interest in political power. I remember the revolts against Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's government in Pakistan. And thousands of people taken to the streets. And the tear gas coming under the doors of our classrooms. And we weren't allowed to go out onto the streets. Aap log yahan par deen ke liye aaye ya dunya ke liye aaye? This was what we were asked. You came here for religion or you came here for this world? Within a few years, after Zia al-Haq came to power, after the invasion of Afghanistan, after the communist invasion of Afghanistan, the United States badly needed to energize Muslims to all that stuff on jihad that we studied in archaic materials. The most recent textbooks that we had was about six centuries old. So all of that was re-energized and brought into the service of the empire. Jihad was made a real thing. We must get these commies out of Afghanistan. And of course, human beings aren't taps that you turn on and off, So when the commies were turned out of Afghanistan, the empire then needed peace. But a whole generation had grown up, completely dysfunctional, militarized, jihadized. But now, at the moment, the interest, certainly in Afghanistan, certainly in Iraq, is an Islam that is moderate, an Islam that is calm, an Islam that is peaceful. And so now the empire wants peace. It wants war in a lot of other places, in Iran especially. That's now, but they're a bit worried about sending all these people now into Syria. And do we arm the Syrian opposition or don't we? Are we going to have a repeat and so on of what happened with Afghanistan and the Muslims? And the point that I want to make in a bit of a long-winded way, gosh, I'll never get through my talk if I keep on like this. The point that I want to make is this, that peace can also be for death. Peace can also be a way of insisting that the subjugated must remain subjugated. And so the whole logic of peace for life was an alternative to the idea of the peace of death that was being offered by the empire. And so it was interesting then to be confronted with a topic on the humanities for life. Inside this is an acknowledgement. I know that there is water here. I cough because I'm nervous, not because I need to drink water. Inside, when we speak about the humanities for, it is a statement of what for many of us are becoming more and more obvious. Old-fashioned intellectuals still don't, or empire-linked intellectuals still don't like to acknowledge it. It is the pretty sensible idea that there is nothing neutral about the intellectual pursuit, that we shouldn't take it for granted that the humanities, that we study the humanities for life. In the same way that I try to say, one shouldn't take it for granted that peace is for life. Sometimes, in marital, oh gosh, I was really going to commit a crime. I was going to say in marital disputes. That's not what I meant. In domestic violence. In domestic violence, sometimes the woman goes to her parents and says that my husband is beating me up. And the family could sometimes be far more interested in maintaining the marital harmony. And then they send the daughter back, go back, how do we keep the peace? And so there can be peace in a marital relationship. It doesn't mean that it's a just relationship. In such kinds of relationships as in the world, I put it to you that it may be our responsibility to disturb the peace. And so it's an acknowledgement. Feminist scholars have acknowledged this, liberation theologians, post-colonial scholars, that, that there is nothing neutral about our academic pursuit. Much has been written about embedded scholarship, more specifically how, not so much in the humanities, but in some of the social sciences, like, for example, anthropology, economics, or psychology, how this has been much more directly used in the service of empire. When psychologists, for example, study ways of seeing how much of torture can people endure before they break down, or when one studies the tribal system or the jirga system in Afghanistan as a way of managing the occupied populations. Much has been written about that, and that's not where I want to go to tonight. So, education is a terrain of struggle. I want to draw a good bit on the work of Robert Jensen, who has written Citizens of the Empire, amongst others, and Jennifer Sumner in her work From Academic Imperialism to the Civil Commons in my talk. But a word quickly about this progressive Islam thing and saying a bit more about how I define it. The term was first popularized in 1983 by Shoroosh Irfani, an Iranian scholar who is currently based in Pakistan. And he described it as the progressive Islamic movement is anti-imperialist. And in the economic domain, its opposition to capitalism and the exploitative system on which capitalism rests is unequivocal. It believes that Islam as an ideology can mobilize the Muslim masses by its appeal to social justice and the challenges it poses to the status quo. This was the definition that I held onto for a long time. Much later, with a group of friends in different parts of the world, we developed another definition of progressive Islam. Progressive Islam is that understanding of Islam and its sources which comes from and is shaped within a commitment to transform society. And the transformation of society is from an unjust one, where people are the mere objects of exploitation by governments, socio-economic institutions, and unequal relationships. Quite a comprehensive understanding of injustice. And then, the new society will be a just one, where people are the subjects of history, meaning not the objects of other people's exploitation, the shapers of their own destiny in the full awareness that all of humankind is in a state of returning to God, and that the universe was created as a sign of God's presence. So, This is the corner from which I am waging my sectarian battle. Education has always been, as McMurtry tells us, has always been subject to external pressures that seek to subordinate its practice and goals to vested interests of some kind, whether of slave-holding oligarchies, theocratic states, political parties, or merely prevailing dogmas of collective belief. The history of the development of social intelligence is largely a history of this conflict between the claims of education and inquiry on the one hand, and the demands of the ruling interests and ideologies on the other, unquote. And so Jennifer Sumner tells us that, or in Jennifer Sumner's words, slightly simplistic, I think, that there are two forms of education: for sustainable development, and on the one hand, and one that can be understood as academic imperialism. And this academic imperialism reflects the deeper imperialism of the corporate agenda, and one that embodies a fundamental form of cooperation that is consistent with a truly sustainable development on the other. I am in my religious corner. I am depicting the corporate agenda as a religious sect, as a fundamentalist religious sect. Now, of course, we know, I mean, in those, I mean, you know, there's always space. Religious people can get pretty, this we are chosen, all the others are frozen, only our sect is the only sect that's going to go to hell, and it's our task to defrost you. If we don't defrost you, hell will defrost you. Okay, so perhaps I'm in the same way falling prey to these kinds of binaries. Binaries are often problematic. They're not entirely problematic always. When we speak about a struggle against patriarchy, we do not necessarily imply that men are the problem. We do not envisage a struggle of men against women. When we talk about a struggle against racism, we don't mean that whites are the problem. We don't mean that black communities never have any problems, are never culpable. But you can still speak about a struggle against racism. You can still speak about a struggle, you can still speak of a struggle against sexism. When you engage in a struggle for civil rights or civil liberties, I often use the analogy of a black worker in South Africa in the apartheid era, who during the day deserves your attention. Exploited worker, dehumanized, only recognized for his economic value that he brings, and at night he is in an abusive relationship with his wife. The fact that he is in an abusive relationship with his wife does not detract from the legitimacy of you being in solidarity with him at night, with him during the day. He is still a black worker that is in need of and worthy of your solidarity. And so binaries can be helpful. You can still talk about the workers' struggle, as long as you also make sure that there are other struggles as well. There is a gender struggle. We have only 24 hours in a day, so strategically we sometimes have to define, you know, where do we want to pitch our battles. And so, in contrast to this idea of intellectual pursuit for a corporate agenda, I want to postulate the idea of the humanities for a global community. But a global community that recognizes the limitations to the human. You know, very often Muslims in relation to the empire are very, very good at playing the victim. We complain of being harassed at airports. We complained, oh, thanks, by the way, for introducing the halal food this semester. I think it's just wonderful, and I enjoyed it very, very much, the lunch that I had in the afternoon. But we complain. There's no accommodation made for us. There's no proper facilities for us. We are demonized. We are racially profiled. Our countries are being invaded. There's no respect for our spaces, and so on. And at the same time, we are very, very good. All of those lamentations that we have against the empire, we're pretty good at inflicting all of those crimes onto our own internal others. Our own internal others, particularly Muslim women. If you look at Muslim issues that they have with the empire, all of those issues are reflected in how, in general, Muslim societies deal with women. And so, often in our critique in the humanities, in how we are being dealt with by those at the higher rungs in our own pecking order. Like, you know, in biblical, in religion studies, for example, we kind of, oh gosh, we barely tolerate the Bible school people. And then the theology folks are like barely tolerated by the religious studies folks. And the religious studies folks are like barely tolerated by the other people in the humanities. And the humanities in the social sciences. And the social sciences in the quote-unquote hard sciences. And so when we fight for space for ourselves inside the humanities, I'm talking now as a religious studies scholars, from my colleagues who are in the higher pecking order above me, I should also be asking, is that just a reflection of survival about my job? Or am I just using language of acceptance and diversity and so on in order to create space for myself or to secure my job? Or am I really interested in creating an alternative world? And in our asking the question about the humanities for what first, and in asserting the humanities for life, we need to ask the same questions that Muslims need to ask about how they deal with women, that those of us in the humanities ask of how we are being marginalized by the pure sciences. There's no such thing as a pure science, but they like to think of themselves as pure, okay. We need to ask the same question when we raise the question of the humanities for life. Is it just human life that we are concerned about? Or are we recognizing how our own lives are inexorably intertwined with other forms of life? If you think that you can find a space for yourself inside the humanities without recognizing how the humanities, firstly, is increasingly being shaped by corporate interests on the one hand, and on the other hand, painfully oblivious to our responsibility to the other entities with whom we share this earth. About the role of the humanities inside globalization. Many people are beginning to talk about globalization as a new form of colonialism. You know, I don't know, I mean, I'm not completely familiar with the kind of pressures that those of you who are in the humanities face. I'm talking particularly as academics. I'm sure, even as students, you experience this. What can I do with this? What job will I land with this? How productive is this course of studies for me? And so, we not only studying human beings in the humanities, but the reality is that in an unthought way, the humanities contributes to a larger project, which is the reduction of human beings to an economic animal. You are a consumer. Your studies must contribute to your commodification. How will it look on my CV? How will I be able to sell myself? And so there is a larger project at work. And this is a project that reduces human beings to a simple commodity. As a Muslim, I believe that humankind are both a trust unto themselves, for whom they have to render an account one day, that human beings are in a state of transitioning all the time. You know, there's this Quranic verse that Muslims use, and they say when somebody dies, they always respond by saying, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." That indeed we come from God. And when they do translate it, they always mistranslate it. And they say, "And unto God we're going to return." No. The form of the verb that is used is fa'il, that you are in a state of returning to God. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This continuous moving towards God. And so the whole idea, for me as a Muslim, is that human beings have a trust. We are entrusted with the earth, we are entrusted with our own lives, and we are in a state of returning, and then there is an accountability. Now, I haven't figured out the details of this accountability. The Quran is very graphic about all of this accountability and so on. It doesn't really make any sense to me. I gave a talk just on my way here on the socio-economic justice in the shorter Meccan surahs. And the shorter Meccan surahs are filled with images of what this year after looks like. I'm on record, so I must be careful about what I say. Okay, let me say that I don't understand enough about this year after stuff to say that it makes rational sense to me. But I also acknowledge that I'm not just a rational being, okay? I better cover myself from the accusations of kufr before I get into too much trouble. Also, I can see a number of kind of Muslims, at least from some of your gaps. I don't know how deep in trouble. I was going to use a four-letter word, so I don't know how deep in trouble I'm really going to be. But anyway, let me say what I want to say. Okay. So this idea of insan, of human beings as an amana, as a trust, the whole idea of homo economicus is in complete opposition to the sacredness of this being that is the carrier of the Spirit of God. You know, the Quran speaks about وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِهِ, that when the first human being was created, God blew of God's Spirit into human beings. And so we are sacred. We are the carriers of that Spirit of the transcendent. We're not just a commodity. We're not just a person on sale or a person for sale. And so, this is my beef with the larger project that there is around us and steering the humanities at the moment. This pressure for ever, I'm quoting Sumner now, this pressure for ever higher profits, with ever lower costs, that creates the incubus that is corporate globalization. Under its agenda, environmental damage, child labor abuses, massive unemployment, hazardous workplaces are externalities that must not be allowed to affect the constant search for the lowest cost possible in order to generate the highest profits imaginable. This is the orthodoxy that is being sold to us all the time. This is the dominant religion that is being sold to us all the time. David Lloyd, and so there is a radical reshaping of what it means to be human. I am a contestant in this fight to recapture another idea of what it means to be human. David Lloyd, the Buddhist thinker, and Harvey Cox, the Harvard-based Christian scholar, have both provided valuable insights into how corporate globalization is becoming the first truly world religion, binding all corners of the globe into a worldview and set of values whose religious role we overlook only because we insist on seeing them as secular, unquote. Cox writes about his trepidation when he first ventured into reading about economics. He thought that when he was going to be looking into economics in a serious way, that he was deviating from a much more familiar theological terrain. He was surprised by the familiarity of all that he encountered. And I'm quoting Cox now. Harvey, do any of you know Harvey Cox? Heard of him? Yes, some of you have, yes. Expecting a terra incognita, I found myself in the land of déjà vu. The lexicon of the Wall Street Journal and the business section of Time and Newsweek turned out to bear a striking resemblance to Genesis, the epistle to the Romans, and St. Augustine's City of God. Behind descriptions of market reforms, monetary policy, the convolutions of the Tao, I gradually made out the pieces of a grand narrative about the inner meaning of human history, why things had gone wrong, and how to put them right. Theologians call these myths of origin, legends of the fall, and doctrines of sin and redemption. But here they were, and only in thin disguise, chronicles about the creation of wealth, the seductive temptations of statism, creativity to faceless economic cycles, and ultimately salvation through the advent of the free market, with a small dose of ascetic belt tightening along the way, especially for then East Asian economies. So something about religion and the way in which I quickly say some of the basic stuff that makes up religion. A sense of a transcendent. Different people call this transcendent different things. The transcendent, God, or an ultimate concern. Buddhists may have it that way. It's at the core of religion. And the focus of the believer's life and physical death is an attempt at moving closer towards that, or concretizing that in his or her life. Religions in general have a theology of self within otherness, temples, mosques, churches that are abodes where a purer form of an attempt is expressed to connect with the transcendent. Being religious is a way of being in the world with its unique and often competing symbols, the cross and the crescent. And for many religious believers, there's also a paradise or a nirvana for the faithful adherents, and a hell for those who refuse to join them or failed to do so because of their essentially evil nature. David Lloyd, this Buddhist colleague of mine, or former colleague of mine at Xavier University, argues because we failed to recognize corporate interests and market capitalism as a religion, let alone a fundamentalist one, we have failed to offer what is most needed, and I quote, a meaningful challenge to the aggressive proselytizing of market capitalism, which has already become the most successful religion of all time, winning more converts more quickly than any previous belief system in human history. I want to briefly chat to you about the way in which I see this heretical faith in competition with mine. Adherents of the free market see their lives driven to the worship of the one all-powerful and jealous God, capital. Underpinned by its theology economics, it has numerous huge temples in the forms of shopping malls, where people are increasingly being drawn to by their deeply unfulfilled inner needs. Earlier on there was the temple or the mosque. Now I shop to feel good. I go to the mall to just hang out. The connectedness with both God and community provided by the temple has now been supplanted by the highly individualized and anonymous encounters between cashier and consumer. And cashiers are also being eliminated. You just have to deal with the machine now. These temples of consumerism display a determination to drive out all the small little corner churches, propounding insignificant little heresies, such as the humanness of chatting to your friendly butcher. The main symbol of this religion, that golden arch of McDonald's, has driven out the other symbol of now old-fashioned religion, the crucifix of Christianity, as the most widely recognized symbol in the world. And you know, it's really sad that many, many Muslims think that their beef, halal, that their beef is really with a crucifix. I think that the beef that all of us have is with the reduction of all of human life as slaves to this huge new end. The arch is telling the crucifix, the Lord your God is one. You shall have none others in my presence. And many who have remained nominal religionists find their lives rotating around the worship of capital, and like suicide bombers drive themselves to death as sacrificial lambs or martyrs at the altar of success. Shop till you drop is a basic creed of the faith. It's difficult to leave one's home or to switch on your TV without being confronted by its missionaries or having a pamphlet thrust in your hand. Convert now or you will lose out. Buy now, the sale ends today. So, and you know, it's really tragic in the United States. I mean, after Thanksgiving, it's truly, it's a very sad sight to behold. I really find it a very, very painful sight to behold. And people die in these stampedes, you know. So successful have their missionary activities been that we restrain our annoyance at the intrusions into our lives. We confine it to the Jehovah's Witnesses. They have an eschatology, even a theory of the end of history. Paradise awaits those who believe, and hell those who reject or fall, or have failure written in their destiny. The unemployed are just lazy. The poor shall always be with you. And there is image of this ideal that we must aspire towards, ever elusive. Just be a little bit more faithful. You will win the lotto one day. There is this image of the glorious lounge, the perfect toilet for you, a BMW accompanied by your very own sex bomb. And you complain and lament about these crazy Muslims with their 72 or is it 73 huris. It's the same, you know, you buy this, well, I don't know, do you still buy matchboxes? I remember earlier, some years ago in South Africa, you couldn't see an ad for a matchbox without a woman's body accompanying this ad. And so, and the struggle against countries which choose an economic path is unashamedly described as a crusade with collateral damage. There are no innocent victims in our crusade against Cuba. The children dying under our sanctions are either the offspring of infidels, so who cares? We are doing it for the greater good. Damnation awaits those who do not share the belief of its adherents. Belief is important, for believers will always fall short of as practitioners. And so just work harder, you know, just get 3 jobs, you will arrive there one day. And so, as Sumner tells us, this is what underpins this market, enabling it to tap all the world's resources almost at will, to concentrate and centralize them, to dictate to the world an increasingly homogenized political, cultural, or ideological agenda. In this logic, the academy is compelled to serve the market. Liberal arts colleges and the humanities, if we do not confront both at an ordinary institutional level the assaults on the humanities, the continuous how are you being productive and productive in the economic sense. If we don't confront these questions, either in a direct way or in a way of taking your students through these issues, getting them to critically understand how they are being engineered even as they are growing and grappling with their values. If we do not do this, then we become nothing but Bible schools for this, we are nothing less than simple Bible school, sending converted people and preachers out into the world, drawing them to that other sect. Now you may ask, okay, fine, so you're selling something, you have a sect that you're coming from, and you have issues with this other sect. What really is the difference? I'm not sure about what the differences all are, but I do know that this idea that human beings, young minds, young adults, that all of us are created to serve the narrow economic interest of a small class. There is something inherently wrong with that. Centuries ago, gosh, painfully not centuries ago, in some parts of the world, still today in different forms, in crude forms, I'm talking about slavery now. Did you read the New York Times yesterday about this woman, this young girl of 6 years old, who had to be sold off to another family because of debt that the parents were in? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought, and I was... yeah, I do know that in this shaping of human beings and in the reduction to commodities, that is not a religion that I want to be a part of. I must skip. So, if education is not for accumulation, if the humanities is not for death, for whose life is it? I spoke to you in the beginning about the need to go beyond. Human beings, this is who we are, fine. I am a returnee to God in my own Islamic theological worldview. You may have your own worldviews about what you are and where you are in your journeying, and I know that I'm not speaking in a theological school. But other than me and my journeying, do I have no other responsibilities? There's something, in Islam that I don't quite know where it comes from. I've always heard it in sermons every Friday throughout my time in Pakistan. I don't like it at all, although it has stuck to me because أَلَا إِنَّ الدُّنْيَا خُلِقَتْ لَكُمْ وَإِنَّكُمْ خُلِقْتُمْ لِلْآخِرَةِ. Lo, the world had been created for you, وَإِنَّكُمْ خَلِقْتُمْ لِلْآخِرَةِ. And you have been created for the life to come. I have difficulties with that. I don't know if it is a hadith. I know it is not in the Quran. I don't know where it comes from, but I have difficulties with that. I have difficulties with the idea of women being created from man and for man. And of course in Christianity it's a bit more explicit. Women were created from the rib of Adam. We improved on it. Women were created from the broken rib of Adam. That's our version of it. So we did a bit of a better job than what most of you guys did. But this whole idea about other sentient beings being created for us. You must talk about the exploitation of the earth. You must speak about the taming of the environment. And if you take all of this to its logical conclusion, you can only exist in unequal relationships. And so for me, when I earlier on spoke about this, and I'll wind up in the next 5 or 10 minutes in case you're getting worried about how long is a guy going to ramble on. For me, the humanities is not so much about the answers. Fundamentalisms offer answers. It is about embracing a eurism, a trial and error, a walking into the dark, an embracing of an intellectual humility. One of the people that I looked up, I can't find his name immediately, speaks about this as an ignorance-based worldview. You know, Islamic scholars had this wonderful tradition of all their texts ended with Wallahu a'lam, and God knows better. A sense of, we don't know. The one great thing about the humanities is that the more you learn, the only thing that you become more and more sure about is how little you know. The more and more you learn, the more and more you pursue things, the more and more you become aware of your ignorance. And this is wonderful. Robert Jansen speaks about whatever our individual conception of the future, we should evaluate the assumptions on which those conceptions have been based. This is a moment in which we should abandon any political certainties to which we may want to cling. As we stand at the edge of the end of the ability of the ecosystem in which we live to sustain life as we know it, what kind of hubris would it take to make claims that we know the future? Wes Jackson, he's the guy who spoke about ignorance-based worldview, says, for all our cleverness, we human beings are far more ignorant than knowledgeable. Human accomplishment, skyscrapers, the internet, all of these seduce us into believing the illusion that we control a world that is complex beyond our ability to understand. Jackson suggests that it would be wise to recognize this and commit to an ignorance-based worldview. You know, it's just amazing. I speak very often. I'm a bit of an accomplished speaker. I never get this right. It's like all of you, I think 99% of you students, you all know that if I only had another day in which to turn in this essay, I would have done a better job. But you never bloody learn. Every time you have a deadline, you do the same. I've been speaking for years now. And every time I do the same, I have a couple of leftover pages that I never get to, and I never learn. Sometimes I do think that human beings are beyond redemption. So, I think we need to teach our students
We need to struggle to have less. We need to redefine not just what we mean about the humanities being for life, but also a redefinition of what a good life is. Central to this project is the willingness to live with less. A number of different technologies that I will not go into, a number of different fundamentalisms that I still wanted to talk about, but I won't go into. I want to say, folks, that for me, a progressive Islam is a commitment to destabilize the current world order. If one other country imbibes the dreams of American society to become great, to become powerful, if one other country comes in, the entire ecosystem will collapse. Our world cannot accommodate your vision of greatness. Our world cannot live alongside your imperial dreams. We can't put up with God Save America. The only way that there is for us to go is for all of us to become smaller. For this country to be broken up in many different small pieces. The whole idea of a sustainer that looks with a particular kind of fondness on a particular piece of land that ends at a river or a mountain or a railway line. What madness is this? How? What makes you think, that people on the other side of the river, the other side of the railway line, the other side of the village, what? The madness of thinking, this Notre Dame, this huge 10-foot story high touchdown Jesus. So you go, you're engaging in your annual battle, your jihad against Purdue. And then you go to the Lady of Lords, the little grotto, you make your sign of the cross, and then you have a mass in the morning and all these believers all in awe.